At the time, he was actually recommended, like, you know what, there's certain aspects of your work where I think you're ready. So I recommend actually sending work out.
Welcome back once again. This is the Pencil Kings podcast, where we talk to inspiring artists and get the story behind their artwork to see how they got started, what they're working on now, and what they've got coming up in the future. I'm your host, Mitch, and show notes for this are going to be at pencilkings.com/Dennis-Brown. That's DENNIS BROWN. Hey, Dennis, how you doing today?
Hey, how's it going?
So to start off, Dennis, why don't you tell us like some of the different industries that you've worked in the past?
I've worked in fashion for a bit. I've worked in social games for, I would say, about almost 4 years. And aside that, I've worked in a range of different genres. I've freelanced for everything from editorial magazines to advertising, and dabbled a bit in like gallery showcasing, and yeah, kind of like an array of different genres.
Nice. I guess what I'm curious about, just after hearing that, is the editorial pieces. I will get into your backstory, but I'm curious about the editorial pieces that you've done, because I feel like this is something that, again, just like our last interview, I don't really know a whole lot about it. And I feel like it's not that difficult to create work, but it's maybe really difficult to get your work in a magazine. I might have it totally wrong, but what was it like for you? Was it just, you have some work and you're showing it around and it's really easy to get into a magazine, or is it actually like it's a really long, hard slog?
Yeah.
Such a negative word. But yeah, what was it like from your point of view?
Yeah, so actually that's pretty interesting. So the school that I attended at the time, one of the instructors that was teaching at our school, his name was Sean Barber, and at the time he was very proactive in pursuing editorial gigs, and he was like really active with the magazine industry. Well, that industry, but like as far as like getting his work into that medium. There was a time when I believe I was still like a junior at the time, and I had him like kind of just like overview my work just to try to get a critique and just get some feedback. And at the time, he was actually recommended, like, you know what, there's certain aspects of your work where I think you're ready. So I recommend actually sending work out. And it was actually kind of a trip for me at the time to hear that, because I was still in school and I was still trying to figure out my style and figure out like what style of work I was going to use to like represent what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
This was around, I said, the early 2000s. So the process that he presented to me was like, you saying like, get a portfolio together, look up a magazine that you feel like your work would like appropriate, and pretty much look up like the art director and get this package together, write up like a cover letter and send it out. And usually with magazines, they get a lot of like submissions from different types of artists. And for the most part, like, if I really wanted to try to get work from them, like, say like wait like 6 months and then maybe try to send another portfolio, like with a more updated work. And for the most part, if you really wanted to get work with them, you kind of just keep going about that process. And so there was one magazine in particular that actually grew up collecting. It was like this hip hop based magazine called Double XL. Yeah, so this was actually the only magazine I actually applied and sent my work out to. And I kind of just wanted to try it out just because I wasn't too sure what to expect, because like I said, I was still in school and I was still kind of focusing on my school studies and such. And yeah, so I think the time that I sent it out was like around the holidays. And
holidays meaning like Thanksgiving?
Oh, I'm sorry, like the end of year holidays. Like,
okay.
Yeah. So around like Christmas time frame. And I would say within like 3 months, I got a random call from one of the art director at the magazine. And yeah, she hit me up and she was interested and gave me my first editorial gig. And for me, it was crazy because it was just like, I think I was 21 or 20 at the time. And this was my first like official, like legit client. So I was like, yeah, super stoked. But yeah, so I guess in the process of like working out that project, usually the art director kind of gives you like a brief on like what the article is about. And then the general process is you do a couple of thumbnails, and then it's kind of like step-by-step process from there, where it's like you work out a few thumbnails, then you guys agree on which one to follow through on. And then like the next stage is like a more cleaned up version. And then once that's, once you pick that, then it kind of goes from like fleshing that out into like a full-on finished piece. And then from there, you kind of send the file out, and usually within like a month time frame, the image gets published and Yeah.
That's so cool. And do you think that had your instructor in college not pushed you, do you think you would have done this on your own at that age? Like it sort of sounded like you felt like you weren't ready, or that you were maybe a little bit surprised that your instructor was like, dude, I think you're already ready. Like, I think, here's some pointers, but I think you should start applying to magazines.
Yeah, I mean, overall, I was really shocked. I mean, it was just more like, what? Because, I mean, I was definitely still trying to figure out my style, still trying to figure out, like, what. I mean, I was still fresh in school, and I was trying different mediums out. And I didn't know, I wasn't too sure if the style that I had at the time was, like, is this one I really want to put out there? And also trying to juggle, like, schoolwork with freelance. Like, I don't know if that was, like, the right time to kind of, like, pursue it. But just going off his recommendation and just going, and just knowing, like, how experienced he was, and I was like, you know what, like, why not? Like, let's just see how it goes. And yeah, after that experience, I was just like, wow, like, oh, I didn't know this was actually possible. And yeah, that was a really like eye-opening experience for sure.
So let's say, do you remember what was in that original portfolio that you sent off to the magazine? So knowing what you know now, if somebody sent you, like if you received that same portfolio and it was your work, from years back when you were just starting out, what do you think do you think you would accept that person? Or what would you see there? Because I feel like, when we all look back at our old work, there's always sort of like this, a little bit of a cringe. You're sort of like, wow, everybody's got to start somewhere, but I'm definitely much further ahead today than I was back then. So if you saw or if you received your original portfolio today from where you're at right now, what do you think you would say to that artist? Would you hire him on? Would you send back feedback, or how would you evaluate it?
I guess I would have to look at it perspective from like the art director stance, but I think in my particular case, I felt like maybe it was just like he just saw potential and just kind of just gave me a shot. Yeah, I mean, looking at my work back then, I had a few pieces I felt like I think they were pretty strong for the time. But at the same time, like thinking back on that portfolio, I kind of had like a range of different styles, and I was still trying to, I guess, find myself. I think I would have like took note to that and probably like would have mentioned that it's like, like, hey, it looks like you have like a range of different styles here. Like, maybe you should try to find one that you feel like is a lot more representative of like, what you really want to do. Because I think a lot of times with like the tricky part of having like a range of different styles is I mean, the upside is like you have an array I like to choose from, but at the same time, like you kind of get a mixed bag where it's like,
Yeah.
like say you're giving an assignment, it's like, okay, cool. Like, well, how are you going to actually flush this one out? Like, are you going to do it in this style or this style? And obviously you could work it out with the art director and be like, you know what, for this particular piece, I want to pursue this way. And if the art director is like open to it, then, obviously you can kind of just like flush it out.
Yeah, that definitely answers the question. And I think it's something that a lot of people have brought up when I've asked them about those early days portfolios, is trying to, limit the number of pieces to probably about 10. That seems to be like the magic number, and make those 10 as strong as possible, and don't make them a mixed bag. Like choose one style that's exciting. It's probably better to be excited about your work and to be continuing to develop a certain style or exploring a certain style and get rejected than it is to present something that's like, look, I can do 4 or 5 different styles. And then the person receiving it is kind of just confused. They're like, well, this one looks like what we want, but you've only got 2 examples of in that style, and then this other stuff is definitely not what we want. So we're going to go with this other guy who has 10 pieces, and then we feel more confident that he's able to gel with our style, or we can see more in his work. Because I think when you see like a collection of work, then you can evaluate it as a whole. But if you only see like a small snippet, you can't really say like, well, how much depth is here?
Right. I mean, yeah, that's actually an interesting point, because like what I was saying, like my portfolio back then was like pretty diverse, but at the same time, like fast forward to like a decade later, and like to a certain degree, I feel like I'm kind of still in that same boat where it's like, I mean, I have a lot more work to show now, and I have a lot more experience, but at the same time, it's still a pretty broad spectrum where it's like I have work that's like really specific towards games and very like heavy digital. Everything's like either production based or like, game ready assets. And then I have more like fine arts work where it's like, like oil paintings and like traditional mediums and such. And as for me, like I actually enjoy that range, and like the upside of having that range is I get to dabble in all these different genres. Whereas like if my style was heavy on one end, then in a certain way I'd be kind of pigeonholed towards that, because it's just like, well, if all my stuff is just digital and it's all like heavy like sci-fi fantasy, then obviously that genre is like more than like, that's a genre where I'm probably gonna get more of my work. Whereas like trying to pitch that type of work to like other genres, it's like a harder sell, whereas like
Definitely.
if all my work is all dragons and robots, like trying to pitch that to like a fashion company, it's like, well, what am I going to do with this?
Yeah.
So
Some kind of like LARPing fashion line where people are dressing up as wizards. It might fly in that case, but
I mean,
generally,
there's yeah. I mean, there's the fan base for everything, right? So.
Prince of Kings, Prince of Kings, Prince of Kings, Prince of Kings, Prince of Kings.
So I would like to talk a little bit about your Tumblr site, because one of the things that I think is really cool about this is that it shows such a wide range, but it's not a mixed bag. It's very clearly like, I'm doing this style, and then I'm doing this other style, and then I'm doing this other style. And style is maybe not even the right word, because they're so different. Because it's like, it's not just the style, it's the medium, it's everything. But how do you do that? Like, I feel like you're pulling them off. Every style is very clear, and I feel like it's executed at an extremely high level. But how do you do that? Because there's so many people, and I'm just going to be the voice of a lot of people that I've talked to inside our community, and they struggle with coming up with one style. And then here you are I don't know what the sort of like the time period is on these pieces, but it's like, there's this huge jump in the style and everything. And it's awesome. Like every time you do it, you change it. It's awesome. So how do you approach that? Or how do you think about it when you're going to make a leap and you're going to, I don't know if you do experiments first in a different style, or if you just say like, no, I'm doing it. I don't need to do experiments. I know what I want to do. How does it work? And I'm asking from the person who's kind of struggling with coming up with one style and seeing how you've been able to pull this off successfully multiple times. When you're looking at a new style, what's the kind of like thought process, or how do you approach it? Say tomorrow you wanted to change things up again. What would you think about? Or, I just don't know, because I have never done this myself.
Yeah, I would say if anything, really the result of like certain styles and the change of, I guess the range of different styles is primarily based off of like the actual like mediums. So I've always been interested in just understanding like how mediums work, like anything from like pencil rendering to like ink drawing to like acrylic painting to like oil painting. So the school that I attended at the time was like heavy traditional. We definitely had like a range of like digital stuff, but the traditional medium was pretty heavy handed. And like we actually had classes where there were like mixed media classes where we'd have assignments that were specifically based on just the medium, and then the content was like secondary. Mm-hmm. So like our first assignment was like, okay, do like a heavy rendered pencil drawing of like this topic. And then it went from that to like, okay, here, the next assignment is just like, we're going to focus on pen and ink and how the different range of like how this medium works. And then the next assignment was like, okay, we're going to do a sci-fi like acrylic painting. For me, like I felt like that was like something that I was like really, really drawn to. And even like with art school and learning art coming up was like, I've always been fascinated with how you make an image and like the different ways you make an image. So anytime I would see an image, like I'd always try to break down like, okay, how was that image made? And if it was something that I wasn't familiar with, I would try to figure it out and try to make sense of like, oh, okay, like this is done in acrylic, so this is what it's going to look like when you have the finished piece. So naturally, I've always been kind of drawn to that, and school was like a perfect setting for that, because it was like it allowed me to experiment and try all these different options out, and then and I definitely do like a lot of experimenting where I try to do like a lot of crossover mediums and see like what medium does what, because like every medium has its own strength.
Right.
Like for example, like acrylic's like really good with like textures, and it's like fast drying, and it's like less toxic, but at the same time like oils has a whole nother realm where it's like the range of value is just a lot more, I guess, varied, and also like the depth that you can get in a piece from working at oils like you can't get in acrylic or any other medium. And I just like love that like each medium has its own benefit. For me, it was just like, why not even just try all these different things? Because every time you make a mark with a certain tool, it kind of takes you towards a whole, or it gives you a different feel and takes you a whole different direction. So I think for me, dabbling in all these different mediums kind of sets up like the potential of like, it sets up the direction that the style ends up going.
Okay, so I guess then if somebody's like, okay, I don't know what my style is, maybe maybe with digital, there's too many options with digital because you can mimic so many things. So that's maybe not a great place to start. It might be better to start with pen and ink or ink drawing, because then you've basically taken color off the table. Or you can always come back and color things, but you've taken color off the table, and now you're just exploring. And maybe you try pens. That's what I loved. When I found pens, I was just in love. But then maybe you also try brushes and ink, and seeing what that does to your work, and just having fun with it, basically, I think, because I feel like there's so much tension, and you just don't know how your work is going to turn out when you're trying a new medium. But if you just have fun with the process, which it sounds like is one of the things that you just love, exploring all these different mediums and seeing how you can push them, seeing how you can use them, and you're just using them like they're tools, and they're all different tools kind of in your tool belt, and starting with something simple and then seeing what you can come up with in that medium. And then that might be, the inkling of what you need to kind of lock down your style. What do you think?
Prince of Kings, Prince of Kings, Prince of Kings, Prince of Kings, Prince of Kings.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's interesting with style. So I think naturally, like with any artist, and for the most part, as far as like coming up with the style, like I know some people like, oh yeah, they put a lot of energy trying to figure out like, okay, what's my style? But at the same time, like everyone has a style. Like anytime you write a signature or write whatever, like you have your own signature take to that mark making. So it's like, for the most part, it's more about actually putting in the work and creating the imagery, and then a lot of times your style just kind of just shows up, just because like the way you draw a face is like a lot of times pretty signature to the way you draw the face. And in most cases, like I feel like there should be more energy towards actually producing more work, and the more you do, the more you start to find yourself in the way you enjoy like making marks, and then you find the ways that certain mediums that you enjoy using. And it's pretty interesting that you mentioned like the digital approach. Like I just listened to an interview with Craig Mullins with Bobby Chu. I believe it's a pretty recent interview, and it was actually really good and really informative. And
yeah, like for those who are listening who have never heard of Craig Mullins before, he had a website called Good Brush, and it was sort of like the beginning of the internet and Photoshop coming up. And there was in those early days, there's only a handful of really amazing people that people look up to, and I think like Sejin was one, and Good Brush was another one, and his paintings were just amazing.
Yeah, I mean, he's pretty much like the godfather of like digital painting, right? I mean, he's definitely like the guy. But yeah, during his interview, it was really interesting that there was a segment where he did bring up how digital art, like these days, it's like for the most part, you can make so many edits, and there's like a way that most digital art looks that a lot of times there's a common look, even though obviously there are like still like signature styles amongst like different artists. But overall, like a lot of times there's like a certain look, because with digital stuff, you could just keep polishing the image over and over until you reach like a certain level of perfection. And it was interesting hearing him say that how like early on when he was like, I guess, heavy using the mouse, and like when the brushes were limited, like he had like a lot of like strokes that would just show just like the circle, like of the paint tool, and how a lot of that work had like a lot more character, just because it just forced him to use like his understanding of like making an image. And it was interesting too how he was saying that he's more interested in trying to do more traditional mediums and kind of mix in with the digital to try to have like a different presentation to his work. I thought that was like a pretty interesting segment.
Yeah, I definitely hear what you're saying, and I think that's a good. I remember in art school, I was using twigs for a while as my paintbrushes, just because you had no control with them. And if you're somebody that tends to be like, you really try to control everything, then try using a medium where you don't have as much control, because it'll force you to kind of get outside of where you naturally are, and then maybe you're able to move quicker and produce more work, and then find your style. And then I also really liked what you brought up about your signature. And like for me, my signature was something that bothered me a lot when I was a kid. I just didn't like my signature at all. And it's something that I practiced and practiced and practiced, and just said, I'm going to have a badass signature. And for me, I really like my signature now, but it was something that you just focus on and you work at it. And I think it's like anything else. You can focus on any part of your art and work at it and refine it. But it's a refining process. It's not like you just sit down one day and you're like, boom, there's my style. It's an evolution. right, Dennis, I think we're pretty much at the end of this podcast. I feel like we spent so much time talking about style, but I know that the listeners love that because, and it's really important because we get these questions about it all the time. And I feel it's something that people just continue to struggle with. And so I think that what you've explained here is going to be really helpful for people. Where's the best place for people to find your artwork online?
You can find me at bagger43.com. It's BAGGER43.com. And I'm actually pretty active on Instagram. And I have a lot of like exclusive stuff that I usually post just on there. And that's at BAGS43.
Cool. And then we'll have show notes for this as well at pencilkings.com/Dennis-Brown, DENNIS-BROWN. That's it. I really encourage you to go and check out Dennis's artwork. I personally really love the graphic quality of this work, and it's of a style that I really enjoy. I don't want to say it's simple because it's not simple, but I like that, like, black and white is simple to me. I like the stylizations that you've done and the sketchbook pages that you show. I think this stuff is really cool, and I feel inspired by it. So thank you for hopping on the podcast with us, Dennis. I really appreciate it. And I encourage you listeners to go check this out. And if you're struggling with your style, to pick a medium, try and do that like we talked about, or pick a small part of something and try to refine that and see if you can get closer to something that you're happy with, because it just takes time. And but if you keep working at it, you're definitely going to get somewhere.
Oh yeah, thanks so much for having me.
All right, thanks, Dennis. Take care.
Scope demands patience, skill, years of practice.
You talk like a fool. I would trade a century of practice for an ounce of inspiration.